Welcome to A Kingly Person, Justice and the Just, from the teachings of Musonius Rufus, vegetarian, part 1 of 2 on words of wisdom. Gaius Musonius Rufus, vegetarian, was one of the great Stoic philosophers of the Roman Empire. He lived in the 1st century CE and was born in Volsinii, an ancient city of Etruria that is now part of present-day Italy. His philosophy focused on the study and practice of virtue. He believed that everyone is capable of being virtuous. However, people who had not learned the skills of ethical living could not be expected to live without error. Thus, he lived and promoted a simple and frugal lifestyle, which included the learning of self-control, modesty, courage, and benevolence. He was a vegetarian and taught that being mindful of one's diet was a vital virtue. His students included Roman noblemen, senators, and future philosophers. In the years following, his wisdom continued to have an impact on later Stoic philosophy as well as early Christian moral thought. Epictetus, another great Stoic philosopher, was his most notable student, whose principles were deeply influenced by his mentor. Although the works of Gaius Musonius Rufus are mentioned in the writings of Epictetus, most have been lost through time. However, his philosophical teachings in the form of aphoristic sayings and discourses were preserved by his students. This was later translated and included in Cora E. Lutz's book Musonius Rufus, the Roman Socrates. Today we would like to convey the discourse that kings also should study philosophy, where the philosopher expounds on the importance that leaders and people in authority must truly understand justice and be just in their actions. That kings also should study philosophy. When one of the kings from Syria once came to him, for at that time there were still kings in Syria, vassals of the Romans, amongst many other things he had to say to the man were the following words in particular. "Do not imagine," he said, "that it is more appropriate for anyone to study philosophy than for you, nor for any other reason than because you are a king. For the first duty of a king is to be able to protect and benefit his people, and a protector and benefactor must know what is good for a man and what is bad, what is helpful and what is harmful, what is advantageous and what is disadvantageous, inasmuch as it is plain that those who ally themselves with evil come to harm, while those who cleave to good enjoy protection, and those who are deemed worthy of help and advantage enjoy benefits, while those who involve themselves in things disadvantageous and harmful suffer punishment. But to distinguish between good and bad, advantages and disadvantages, helpful and harmful, is the part of none other than the philosopher, who constantly occupies himself with this very question, how not to be ignorant of any of these things, and has made it his art to understand what conduces to a man's happiness or unhappiness. Therefore, it appears that the king should study philosophy. Furthermore, it is fitting for a king, or rather it is an absolute necessity for him, to arbitrate justice between subjects, so that no one may have more or less than his just deserts, but may receive honor or punishment as he deserves. But how would anyone who was not just ever be able to manage this? And how would anyone ever be just if he did not understand the nature of justice? Here again is a reason the king should study philosophy, for without such study, it would not be plain that he knew justice and the just. For one cannot deny either that the one who has learned it will understand justice better than the one who has not learned it, or that all who have not studied philosophy are ignorant of its nature. The truth of this statement appears from the fact that men disagree and contend with one another about justice, some saying that it is here, others that it is there. Yet about things of which men have knowledge, there is no difference of opinion, as for example about white and black, or hot and cold, or soft and hard. but all think the same about them and use the same words. In just the same way, they would agree about justice if they knew what it was, but in their very lack of agreement, they reveal their ignorance. Indeed, I am inclined to think that you are not far from such ignorance yourself, and you ought, therefore, more than anyone else, to concern yourself with this knowledge. The more disgraceful it is for a king than for a private citizen to be ignorant about justice. In the next place, it is essential for the king to exercise self-control over himself and demand self-control of his subjects, to the end that with sober rule and seemly submission there shall be no wantonness on the part of either. For the ruin of the ruler and the citizen alike is wantonness. But how would anyone achieve self-control if he did not make an effort to curb his desires? Or how could one who was undisciplined make others temperate? One can mention no study except philosophy that develops self-control. Certainly, it teaches one to be above pleasure and greed, to admire thrift, and to avoid extravagance. It trains one to have a sense of shame and to control one's tongue, and it produces discipline, order and courtesy, and in general what is fitting in action and in bearing. In an ordinary man, when these qualities are present, they give him dignity and self-command, but if they be present in a king, they make him preeminently godlike and worthy of reverence. Now, since fearlessness and intrepidity and boldness are the product of courage, how else would a man acquire them than by having a firm conviction that death and hardships are not evils? For these are the things, death and hardships, I repeat, which unbalance and frighten men when they believe that they are evils, that they are not evils. Philosophy is the only teacher. Consequently, if kings ought to possess courage, and they, more than anyone else, should possess it, they must set themselves to the study of philosophy, since they cannot become courageous by any other means. It is also the prerogative of kings to be invincible in reason, and to be able to prevail over disputants through their arguments. Thus, when kings are weak in this, it stands to reason that often they are misled and forced to accept the false as the truth, which is the price of folly and dense ignorance. Now philosophy, by its nature, confers upon its devotees, perhaps more than anything else, the ability to remain superior to others in debate, to distinguish the false from the true, and to refute the one and to confirm the other. Professional speakers, at any rate, whenever they enter into the give and take of argument with philosophers, can seem confused and confounded and obliged to contradict themselves. And yet, if such speakers, whose business it is to practice debate, are caught because they are inferior to the philosophers in argument, what is bound to happen to other men? Therefore, if it is the ambition of anyone who is a king to be powerful in debate, he should study philosophy in order that he may not have to fear that anyone will prevail over him in this, for a king should be completely fearless and courageous and invincible.
Be their biggest defender. Try vegan. Chris Smalling, vegan.
Precious viewers, thank you for watching today's Words of Wisdom.